Nobody tells you how hard it is to get back into making videos. Anyway, I'm on the horse.
Hi YouTube, it's Kia of Kia Comments, and I'm back with another video. I know it's been years since I've created any content, and I'm here to talk about the Booktube Prize. I'm a fiction judge for the Octofinals, and I wanted to talk about the books that I read and about my criterion as a judge. The Booktube Prize was created a year ago. It's now in its second year. Robert of Botterhordes created the prize. I'll leave the link to his channel in the description box below or somewhere up here. And the prize is exactly what it sounds like. It is a range of booktubers and bookstagrammers coming together to judge literary fiction and non-fiction published in the United States of America in the year 2019. If you want more information about how the picks for the books were made and how the judges were chosen, please go to the Booktube Prize channel. I'll leave the link in the description box below, where Robert outlines exactly how he went about the logistics of this prize. So I'm a judge in the literary fiction category, and in this category 48 books were chosen, and each of those 48 books were split into 8 groups of 6 to be exact, and I was a judge for Fiction Group B. The books in Fiction Group B include Women Talking by Miriam Towles, Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, The Dutch House by Anne Patchett, A Single Thread by Tracy Chevalier, and Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I have to say I was pleased by the mixture of books in my group. There are some books that I had already read, and I made the decision to go ahead and reread them. And there were some books that I don't know that I would have read had they not been in the category which I was judging. The standards by which I judged the books were, of course, deeply subjective and were based off of what I think makes good literary fiction. And what does make good literary fiction, Christy? Well, since you asked, I will tell you. My standards were based on narrative structure, character, plot, place and setting, readability and engagement, themes, education, and finally, originality. So that's 8 categories, and I chose the arbitrary number of 5 as the highest that any book could get in a specific category because that made a nice round number. So the highest a book could get was 40. I'm going to talk about the books from my least favorite to my favorite, and I'm also going to let you know at the end of the video which of my top books made it into the semifinals. Ghost Wall, a book where readers watch a family take a vacation, joining an anthropology group of college students and a professor to reenact the Iron Age, was my least favorite book. I just didn't believe it. I didn't believe that a family who joined a group to live as individuals in the United Kingdom in the Iron Age would come to the precipice or to the climax that the book came to. I know that based on the social environment, people can really degenerate into a certain type of behavior quickly. Having said that, I still don't believe that it could happen. I could have believed it if the book had been longer, if the book had taken more time to give me context for the relationships, not just between the family, but the relationships between the individuals outside of the family. Who were the college students? Why were they the way that they were? Then I could have believed the buy-in that came from the college students, because I sort of kind of believed the buy-in that came from the family. But nevertheless, this was my least favorite book. It got 18 points out of 40. And I will leave a listing of how that 18 points broke down based on the categories up top or on the side. Next came A Single Thread with 19 points. Again, this book is a book that I didn't buy into. Not because it wasn't believable, but I didn't care about the character. Readers follow Violet, who is a single woman living with her mother after the Great War. Her fiance has died, and Violet makes a decision to move out. I can get behind the fact that Violet takes autonomy over her life. What I never could get behind, or never did get behind, was the fact that I didn't care about Violet. Like, I didn't care about her. This is a book that I think in the hands of another reader would be deeply appreciated. But in the hands of this reader, I just felt like I didn't care about Violet. I didn't care that Violet moved to a new town. She joined a group of women who make these embroidered kneelers in a church, and she really goes on to do some amazing things. And while I knew they were amazing things, and I knew that this was a part of history that I should be interested in, I wasn't interested in it through the eyes of Violet. But like I said, some books are for some and some books are for others, and this book just wasn't for me. Gods of Jade and Shadow, which is set in 1920s Mexico, follows Cassiopeia Tun, who is the poor granddaughter of a rich landowner in Yucatan, Mexico. While at home in her grandfather's estate, Cassiopeia stumbles across a chest full of bones. The bones are the bones of Hun Kame, who is a Mexican god killed or made dormant by his twin brother. Cassiopeia inadvertently reawakens Hun Kame, and the story goes from there. The thing that I found most enjoyable about this story was the mythology of Hun Kame and his twin brother, who are lords of the underworld. I also really enjoyed Mexico in the 1920s. What I thought fell short in this novel was the prose. It read like YA and not very complex YA. So while I enjoyed the story in terms of the criterion of what I feel makes good literary fiction, this didn't necessarily score very high. It got 21.5 points. Book number 3, coming in at 22.5 points, was The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. This book follows siblings Danny and Maeve, who are close and are made even closer when their mother abandons them and flees the house they live in that she hates, when their father dies years later and leaves them alone in the house he loves with the stepmother, who then kicks them out and leaves them to fend for themselves. Danny and Maeve spend the latter part of Danny's teenage years and the early part of Maeve's 20s sitting outside of the house that is so representative and so significant to every parent that they've had, as well as to them, musing over the shoulda, coulda, wouldas of their lives, hating the stepmother who kicked them out, and, on Maeve's part, longing for the mother who they never really knew. Now, this book, some people really didn't like. This book, some people loved. I fall into the category of, I really like this book. I feel like when Anne Patchett is on, she's on, and I felt like she was on in this book. However, there are books where Anne Patchett has blown me away. And although she did a good job in this book, it wasn't enough for me to feel like this should be the number 1 pick. Book number 2, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, is a book that is polarizing, but I fall into the camp of, I really enjoyed it. And for a debut, I think that this was a really well done book. I gave this book 24 points, and what I found compelling was the fact that we had a protagonist, Amira, who is an educated Black 20-something working as a babysitter and a typist who is uncertain of herself in the world. But through my reading, that wasn't necessarily because Amira was uncertain of herself in the world. It was because Amira was a Black woman with a ton of potential in a world that kept expecting her to reach her potential. That's not a new story, but that's a new story about a young Black woman. And I found it deeply compelling that there was a Black educated woman on the page who kept being pushed towards her potential, who was, as a matter of fact, just satisfied with being a babysitter and being a typist. She knew she could do better. She even wanted to do better, but she didn't. And in the not doing, it wasn't because of lack of autonomy. It was because she enjoyed being a babysitter. She didn't enjoy being a typist, but she enjoyed the freedom that she got from being a typist. She didn't have to think a lot. She could still be smart about the things that she wanted to be smart about because she was educated and she's naturally intelligent, and you can't take those things away from her. And she got to spend time doing the things that she wanted to do. So I should back up and say that this book follows Amira, a Black babysitter / typist, and her white employer, Alix, who is a 30-something-year-old famous Instagrammer, also famous for her letter writing, where she writes extremely gracious letters to companies and receives items from said companies to promote them on Instagram. Alix is trying to establish herself as more than just a social media guru. She wants to be taken seriously, and she's finding a hard time doing that in Philadelphia, where she recently moved and hired Amira. The dynamics between this white 30-something employer and her Black 20-something nanny aside from the obvious class dynamics and racial dynamics, were interesting to me because of the desire that it seemed like the employer had to inhabit the world of somebody who, on the surface of things, based on what society tells you should be happiness, didn't have as much as the employer. And this brings me to my number one book, Women Talking, which got 24 points. I want to say that this book really surprised me. I didn't know about this book until it was on my radar. Once it was on my radar, I still didn't really feel the need to read a book about women in a Mennonite community gathering to discuss whether or not they wanted to stay in said community based on some really atrocious acts toward them. Books like this are hard for me to read, not just because of the violence, but also because I am not a woman who grew up in a society without autonomy, and so it's incredibly hard for me to understand why a conversation about whether or not to leave a community where said acts were being done upon you is even a conversation. However, that is exactly why this book needed to be read by me. The conversation that these women had, the complexity of the conversations, the unearthing of the lack of autonomy, and the fact that, yes, while it is a must to leave a community where men were drugging and raping you, how do you do that when you don't know how to read? You've never seen a map, when you've been told that to be godlike is to be supplicant toward the very individual who caused you harm. What I really found deeply engaging was the way that these women thought themselves through to agency, the way that they debated with each other, the practicality of their arguments, and the way in which they took these patriarchal interpretations of the Bible and reframed it for their idea of a better life. I really appreciated the fact that I had to read this book. I will read it again. It's been months since I've read it, and I'm still thinking about it. And for all of those reasons, this was my number one pick. Now, Christy, how spot on were you with your picks? Did your top picks in the Octofinals make it through to the quarterfinals? Yes and no. 2 of my 3 made it into the quarterfinals. Miriam Towse's Women Talking and Anne Patchett's The Dutch House. Kylie Reid's Such a Fun Age did not make it into the quarterfinals, and in fact I would say it wasn't a favorite. I still stand by my judgment of that book. I love that it was a debut novel that handled complex themes, and in general I had a good time reading and judging all of these books. Some books were harder to read than others, but not all readers are created equal because we're all subjective, and as a result, not all books and how they are read are created equal. I hope that this was informative. If you have any questions about my judging, please leave them in the comments below. And until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep reviewing. Bye now.